Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The moment I stepped through the front door, the house felt wrong. There was an unnatural stillness, a silence that gnawed at me, creeping under my skin like a cold draft through a cracked window. I dropped my keys on the table and stood there for a moment, just listening. Nothing. I called out for Hannah, but my voice was swallowed by the emptiness. She wasn't here. Again. Lately, she was never here when I got home. She had work late, she said. Meetings, projects, deadlines. Always an excuse, always an explanation. And I bought every single one because that's what you do, right? You trust your wife. But now, as I stood in the center of our living room, surrounded by the echoes of an invisible fracture I couldn't quite place, that trust felt thinner, fragile, like it could snap any second. I looked around trying to shake off the unease. The air felt too thick, the quiet too deep. The little things that used to make this house feel like home were out of place. Small details I shouldn't have noticed but did. A missing plate on the counter, her jacket not slung over the chair like it always was, a faint scent of her perfume still lingering, like she just left. It felt intentional, like she wanted me to know she wasn't here. I sighed, kicking off my shoes and heading into the kitchen. The fridge hummed softly as I pulled it open, the light flickering as if even it was tired. I stared blankly at the contents before grabbing a beer, my hand tightening around the cold bottle. Her phone had been buzzing more frequently lately, too. I didn't think much of it at first. Work's been tough for her, long hours, stress. I get it, but now I wasn't so sure. She was distracted, distant, and every time I asked her about it, she'd wave me off with that tired, strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. I twisted the cap off the bottle and leaned against the counter, my mind running in circles. I couldn't stop replaying old conversations, scanning them for signs, hints, anything I might have missed. It was like I was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, and the more I tried, the more elusive it became. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just me. But then again, maybe it wasn't. I took a long pull from the bottle, trying to drown out that little voice in the back of my head that had been getting louder lately. The voice that told me things weren't fine, that I couldn't just keep ignoring the signs. She was pulling away. I felt it in the empty space beside me in bed, in the way she brushed off my touches, her laughter now just an echo of what it used to be. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening around the bitter taste of the beer. It wasn't always like this. We were good once, weren't we? I tried to remember the last time we had a real conversation, the kind that made me feel connected to her, like we were still in sync. But those moments felt so distant now, like they belonged to a different life. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at it, hoping it was her. It wasn't. Just a work email, another reminder that life kept moving forward whether I was ready for it or not. I put the phone down, staring blankly at the darkened screen, my reflection distorted in the glass. "Daddy?" I flinched at the sound of Lily's voice behind me. I hadn't even heard her come in. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and a little confused. My heart softened instantly, the tension in my chest loosening just enough for me to manage a smile. "Hey, sweetheart." "What are you doing up? It's late." She shuffled over to me, her tiny hands rubbing her tired eyes. "I couldn't sleep. Mommy's not home." I crouched down to her level, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "She's working late again," I said, the lie slipping from my mouth with practiced ease. I hated that I had to say it, hated even more that I was starting to doubt whether it was true. "Why does Mommy work so much?" she asked, her innocent voice cutting through me like a blade. I opened my mouth, but no words came. What could I say? How could I explain something I didn't even understand myself? "She'll be home soon," I finally muttered, pulling her into a hug. Her small arms wrapped around my neck, and I held her a little too tightly, as if I was afraid she'd slip away too. After a few minutes, I carried her back to her room, tucking her into bed. I sat on the edge of her mattress, watching her eyelids grow heavy as she drifted back to sleep. The soft glow of her nightlight cast shadows on the walls, making the room feel smaller, safer. But I wasn't safe. Not anymore. I stared at her peaceful face, my thoughts swirling, the tension creeping back into my bones. This wasn't just about me and Hannah. Lily was in the middle of this too. I couldn't ignore it. Something had changed, and I had to figure out what, for her sake. I left her room, closing the door quietly behind me, and walked back into the living room. The silence was louder now, more oppressive. I checked my watch. Almost midnight. Still no sign of Hannah. That voice in my head wasn't so quiet anymore. It whispered things I didn't want to hear, but I couldn't drown it out. The signs were all there, staring me in the face, mocking me for not seeing them sooner. The late nights, the phone calls, the laughter behind closed doors. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Hannah's messages. Nothing out of the ordinary, just work stuff, casual chats with friends. But it was too clean, too perfect. I knew she was smart enough to cover her tracks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden, just out of reach. As I scrolled through her texts, my mind wandered back to the other day. I'd come home early, earlier than usual. The house was empty, just like tonight. But there was something different that time. Her perfume, that strong floral scent, lingered in the air, almost too fresh. It was like she'd just left, like someone else had been here with her. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. I couldn't jump to conclusions. I had no proof, just a gut feeling that kept twisting tighter and tighter. But that was the thing about gut feelings. They didn't go away. They gnawed at you until you either proved them right or buried them deep enough to ignore. I stood there, my phone still in hand, the room spinning around me. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to pretend everything was fine, that we were just going through a rough patch like every other couple. But the signs were becoming harder to ignore. The pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place, even if I didn't want them to. The door creaked open behind me. I turned to see Hannah walk in, her face flushed, her hair slightly tousled. She smiled, but it was a tired, practiced smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said casually, like it was nothing, like everything was fine. I stared at her, my chest tightening as the unease that had been simmering all night bubbled to the surface. "You're home late again," I said, my voice calm, too calm. She shrugged, brushing off the comment like she always did. "Work was crazy. You know how it is." I nodded slowly, watching her as she moved around the room, avoiding my gaze. She was always good at that, deflecting, sidestepping anything that might lead to a real conversation. "Yeah," I muttered, setting my phone down on the counter. "I know how it is." She kissed my cheek, the gesture mechanical, devoid of any real emotion, and headed toward the bedroom. I stood there, rooted in place, my heart heavy, my mind racing. Something was wrong. I knew it now. This wasn't just paranoia, wasn't just a rough patch. The distance between us wasn't something I could fix with a few kind words or a weekend away. She was pulling away, slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't even know if I could. And as the door clicked shut behind her, the silence settled back over the house like a heavy weight on my chest, suffocating, relentless. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Lily's laughter echoing from the living room. For a second, it was almost comforting, normal even. The kind of sound you hear in a home where everything is in its place. But as soon as my eyes opened, reality settled in, heavy and suffocating. The other side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold. Hannah must have left for work early. Another busy day, no doubt. I stared at her side of the bed for a moment longer than I should have, waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. An apology, an explanation, something real. I got up, stretching out the stiffness in my back as I made my way into the kitchen. The house was quiet again, save for Lily talking to her toys. My little girl, unaware of the cracks spreading beneath her feet. It hit me hard. She had no idea what was happening. That the foundation of her life was slowly collapsing, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. No, that wasn't true. There was something I could do. I just wasn't ready for it yet. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her dolls spread out around her like a small kingdom. She smiled up at me when I entered the room, and for a brief moment, it was enough to soften the ache in my chest. "Daddy, do you want to play?" she asked, holding up one of her dolls. "Maybe later, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. I couldn't, not now. Instead, I busied myself making breakfast, my thoughts stuck on the night before. Every sound felt amplified. Lily's soft voice, the clinking of the spoon against the coffee mug, even the hum of the fridge seemed too loud in the quiet. The tension hadn't gone away, it had only settled deeper into my bones. Something was wrong. I knew it in my gut, but the pieces weren't all there yet. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, though. The late nights, the vague explanations, the way she'd pull her phone closer when I walked into the room. And then there was Lily's comment a few days ago. Mom was with Uncle. It had been nagging at me, circling in my mind like a vulture waiting for a moment to strike. Uncle? Who the hell was she talking about? Lily wasn't the type to make things up, especially not something like that. I'd brushed it off at the time, telling myself it was nothing more than a child's confusion. But the way Hannah had reacted when I casually mentioned it later, the way her face paled, the way she immediately changed the subject, that was when the alarms really started going off in my head. I stood there staring at the pan as the eggs sizzled, my mind running in circles. There was too much that didn't add up, too much I hadn't wanted to see. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Lily's voice broke through my thoughts. I glanced at her, her wide, innocent eyes looking up at me expectantly. It felt like a punch to the gut. "She's at work," I replied, my voice sounding far calmer than I felt. I didn't know if that was true anymore. That evening, I couldn't shake the weight sitting on my chest. Every time I looked at Lily, my heart ached. I couldn't protect her from this. I couldn't shield her from what was coming. If Hannah was cheating, everything we had would unravel. I would lose the family I'd spent my whole life building. And Lily? She would be caught in the middle of it all. The thought of it made me sick. When Hannah came home that night, I was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. She walked in, her face flushed, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, but her shirt was wrinkled, slightly untucked. A small detail, something I might not have noticed before, but now it stood out like a bright red flag. "Hey," she said, her voice light, casual, as if nothing had changed. "Hey," I muttered, barely glancing in her direction. She sat down next to me on the couch, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. The gesture was so mechanical, so devoid of warmth, that it might as well have been a stranger kissing me. "How was your day?" she asked, grabbing her phone from her bag and immediately unlocking it. "Fine," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen, but my focus was anywhere but the TV. "Busy, you know." "Same old." She nodded, her attention already drifting to whatever was on her phone. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, the way her fingers flew across the screen, the faint smile pulling at the corners of her lips. That smile, the one I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "Who's that?" I asked casually, even though I already knew the answer would be vague. "Just work stuff," she said without looking up, her voice breezy, detached. "A client being annoying." I nodded, the familiar bitterness rising in my throat. It was always work. Always some client or project that demanded her attention. Always some excuse to avoid the growing distance between us. I stood up abruptly, needing to put some space between us before the anger bubbling inside me spilled out. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed proof. "I'm going to head to bed," I said, my voice tight. She glanced up, blinking in surprise. "It's early." "I'm tired." I didn't wait for her to respond. I headed upstairs, my mind spinning as I tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I couldn't confront her without knowing for sure, and I wasn't about to accuse her of something this big on a hunch. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy, if you could call it that. I went to work, did what I had to do, but my mind wasn't there. I was distracted, constantly thinking about Hannah, replaying every interaction, every offhand comment, every subtle shift in her demeanor. The signs were there. I just hadn't wanted to see them before, but now I couldn't unsee them. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, and when she wasn't texting, She was laughing softly to herself as she read messages. When I asked about it, she gave me the same answer every time. It's just work. Work. That word was starting to feel like a joke. I knew her job, knew the kind of people she worked with. None of them would have elicited that kind of reaction from her. The pieces were falling into place, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening after Hannah had gone to bed, I sat in the living room staring at her phone on the kitchen counter. She'd left it there carelessly, like she always did. Part of me didn't want to do it. I hated myself for even considering it. But the larger part of me, the part that had been suspicious for weeks, knew this was the only way to get answers. I picked up the phone, my hand shaking slightly as I unlocked it. She hadn't changed the password. It was almost too easy. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for something, anything, that would give me the answers I needed. At first, it was just the usual stuff. Conversations with friends, work colleagues, the usual boring back and forth. But then I found it. A conversation with someone named Uncle Jay. I clicked on it, my stomach twisting into knots as I read the messages. They were casual enough at first, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I scrolled further back, the messages started to shift, becoming flirtatious, intimate. And then I saw it. A message from Hannah. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My hands were trembling, my heart racing. I scrolled further, reading more of their exchanges. Photos, plans, rendezvous I hadn't known about. The proof I needed, but proof I never wanted to find. I sat there staring at the screen, my mind blank, my chest hollow. There it was. The thing I'd been dreading but had known, deep down, was coming. She was cheating, and worse, Lily had been right. Uncle Jay wasn't some figment of her imagination. He was real. He was Jeremy, Hannah's colleague, the guy I'd met a handful of times at her work events, the one she'd always brushed off as just a friend. I felt sick. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen, my grip tightening around the phone until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to smash it, to throw it across the room, to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my breathing shallow, controlled. I had my proof now. But the anger inside me had shifted. It wasn't the blind fury I expected. It was cold, calculated. They had hurt me, yes, but they had hurt my daughter more. They'd brought this man into our lives, into our home, and thought they could get away with it. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind turning over the possibilities, the ways I could make them pay. I wouldn't confront her, not yet. Not until I had a plan. Revenge wasn't about getting even, it was about justice. And I would make them beg. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Hannah with him, Jeremy. His name alone stirred a rage in me that I hadn't known I was capable of. But it wasn't the kind of anger that burned quick and hot. It was cold, sharp, calculated. I lay there in bed, listening to the rhythmic breathing of my wife beside me, pretending that she wasn't betraying me with every breath she took. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, but I knew better now. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the deceit, the audacity to bring it into our home, around our daughter. She had torn the heart out of the family we built, and for what? Cheap thrills? A fling with someone I had foolishly thought was a distant acquaintance? When I couldn't stand the weight of the silence any longer, I slipped out of bed and walked into the kitchen, the dim glow of the refrigerator casting long shadows across the room. I poured myself a glass of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to extinguish the fire burning in my chest. My mind was already formulating a plan. There wasn't going to be a confrontation. Not yet. That was too easy, too satisfying for them. No, this would be slow, precise. I wasn't going to shout or throw things. I wasn't going to plead or beg for explanations. I didn't want to hear why she did it because no reason would ever justify what I had seen on that video. I wanted revenge. But first, I needed to know more. For the next few days, I played the part of the oblivious husband perfectly. I didn't raise a single question, didn't give her any indication that I knew. If anything, I leaned into it, kept the conversation light, smiled when appropriate, even made a few jokes over dinner like things were normal. Hannah played along, unaware that I was already one step ahead of her. She thought she was in control, that her little game was still hidden under the surface. But I was watching her, studying every move, every glance she exchanged with her phone, every moment she disappeared under the guise of work. It was all a lie. I started gathering evidence. It wasn't enough to know. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof that would dismantle her world the way she had dismantled mine. The videos from our security system were damning enough, but I wanted more. I began tracking her phone, simple apps I installed when she wasn't looking. I had access to her messages, her location. Every move she made, I was there, silently, invisibly watching her sink deeper into her web of lies. One afternoon, when she was at work, I sat in my car, parked a few blocks away from her office. I had the phone open in my hand, watching her location as she left the building. Not a meeting this time, but a hotel on the other side of town. I followed at a distance, making sure to keep far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. When she pulled into the hotel parking lot, I felt my heart drop. Seeing it unfold right in front of me, after everything I already knew, still hit harder than I expected. I watched as she stepped out of the car, checked her phone, and walked inside without hesitation. No guilt, no hesitation. I stayed there for an hour. 2. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I imagined what was happening inside that room. Every minute felt like a new betrayal, a new stab to the gut. But I didn't act, not yet. This wasn't the moment. I knew Jeremy's wife. Not well, but enough to recognize her at office parties or the occasional work event. A quiet woman, kind. They had 2 kids, if I remembered correctly. A family, just like mine. Except he was tearing us apart too. I tracked down her number easily enough. It was public information, really. I debated for a few minutes before finally dialing the number, my hand steady on the phone despite the storm of emotions brewing beneath my skin. She answered after a few rings, her voice polite but cautious, as if she could already sense something was wrong. Hello? Hi, it's David. I'm Hannah's husband. I paused, letting the weight of my words hang between us for a moment. I think we need to talk. There was a long silence on the other end, then a shaky exhale. I know. Those 2 words told me everything. She knew. She had been living with the same quiet agony that I had, silently watching her husband slip away into someone else's arms. I could hear the hurt in her voice, the betrayal that mirrored my own. I don't know what to do, she continued, her voice trembling. I want to scream to ruin them both, but that won't change what they did, I finished for her, my tone flat, calm. Look, I'm not asking you to go nuclear, not yet, but I have a plan. A plan? I want them to feel what we feel. I want them to beg. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then she whispered, "What do you need me to do?" For the next week, Jeremy's wife and I communicated regularly, quietly and cautiously. I gave her instructions, small ways to destabilize Jeremy's life without raising suspicion. She began snooping around, gathering evidence on her end. Financial records, texts, emails, anything that could be used to tear him apart. Meanwhile, I kept up the act at home. I didn't let Hannah suspect for even a second that I knew. If anything, I made sure to appear more distant, more distracted. Let her believe that I was too busy with work to notice her indiscretions. It wasn't easy pretending everything was fine when every fiber of my being wanted to confront her, to tear her apart like she'd done to me. But I wasn't going to give in, not yet. One evening, while she was out working late again, I found something that shifted everything. I was going through our joint accounts when I noticed several large withdrawals that I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed they were just regular expenses, but as I dug deeper, I realized the money was being spent on hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts. Not for me, not for our family. I felt my pulse quicken as I scrolled through the transactions. Thousands of dollars. She had been using our savings, our daughter's future, to fund her affair. The money we had set aside for Lily's college fund, for her future, gone. The betrayal I had felt before was nothing compared to the rage that now consumed me. This wasn't just about us anymore. She had crossed a line that I couldn't forgive. Lily's future. I stared at the computer screen, my vision blurring with fury. My hands clenched into fists as I thought about how smug they must have felt, spending what I worked for on their little rendezvous. They hadn't just taken from me, they had taken from my daughter. I would make them pay for this, both of them. I had Jeremy's wife send an anonymous tip to his employer. Just a few lines, carefully crafted to hint at an inappropriate relationship between him and a colleague. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Within days, rumors began circulating at his office. Subtle at first, just enough to make him uncomfortable. It wasn't a full-blown scandal yet, but it was enough to plant the seed of doubt. I could see it in the way Hannah started acting more cautious, more nervous around her phone. She was growing paranoid, sensing the walls closing in around her. Good. Let them squirm. I wasn't done. The next step was Hannah's boss. I sent an anonymous email suggesting inappropriate conduct within the office. I knew the leadership at her company took these things seriously, especially in a world where corporate ethics mattered more than ever. It was only a matter of time before it reached her desk, but still, I kept my distance. Let them wonder. Let them feel the pressure mount, little by little, until they couldn't breathe. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. I orchestrated a meeting. I sent Jeremy and Hannah identical messages from a burner phone, pretending to be each other. I set the location, one of their favorite hotels, a place they had used before, a familiar setting for their secret betrayals. When they arrived, thinking it would be another night of hidden pleasure, they found me instead. I was sitting there, calm, waiting for them. The look on their faces when they saw me was worth every ounce of pain they had caused me. Jeremy went pale, his jaw tightening as he realized the trap he had walked into. Hannah stood frozen, her face flushed with shock, her hands trembling at her sides. "I think we need to talk," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. They didn't speak. They couldn't. The weight of their guilt was written all over their faces. I slid a folder across the table toward them, filled with all the evidence I had collected. The videos, the messages, the financial records showing how they had stolen from our family. "Look at it," I commanded. Jeremy's hands shook as he opened the folder, flipping through the pages. His face grew paler with every piece of evidence he saw. Hannah stood there, silent tears streaming down her face, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The devastation was already there, hanging between us, thick and suffocating. "I could destroy both of you," I said, my voice low, deadly calm. "Your jobs, your reputations, your families, it's all in there." They were silent, their heads bowed, shame written in every line of their bodies. And that was when I said the words that would haunt them forever. "Beg." And they did. Jeremy's face was ashen, his eyes darting from the folder to Hannah and back to me. The weight of the evidence hit him like a hammer, and for a moment, I thought he might pass out from the sheer force of his own guilt. Hannah, on the other hand, had crumbled into herself, her once confident demeanor shattered, reduced to a pitiful figure who couldn't even muster the courage to meet my eyes. I didn't," Jeremy stammered, his voice weak as if he could somehow talk his way out of this. "You didn't what?" I cut him off sharply. "You didn't destroy your family? You didn't betray your wife? You didn't steal from mine?" I leaned forward, my voice lowering, more controlled now, each word a scalpel slicing through the lies they'd built their lives around. "Or maybe you didn't think you'd get caught. Is that it?" Jeremy opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His shoulders sagged, the fight already draining from him. Hannah whimpered beside him, her face buried in her hands. I could see her body trembling, but I felt nothing for her, not anymore. The image of her with him in our bed played on a loop in my mind. Every groan, every touch, every kiss was seared into my brain. I had loved this woman, trusted her. And she had repaid me with betrayal so deep it felt like a knife twisting inside me. "Please, David," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed, a dark, bitter sound that echoed through the room. You didn't mean for it to go this far? What part of it, Hannah? Was it the late nights sneaking around? The hotel rooms? The thousands of dollars you stole from our savings? Or maybe it was the lies you told our daughter. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stop. You brought him into our home, into Lily's life. You let her believe there was an Uncle Jay, didn't you? You thought you could juggle it all, thought I'd never find out. You're more pathetic than I thought. I watched them both with a detached sense of satisfaction. I had planned this perfectly, orchestrated every moment of their downfall, and now the pieces were falling into place. But beneath the satisfaction, there was something else, a numbness that gnawed at me, a hollow emptiness that no amount of revenge could fill. Hannah lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red. I'm so sorry. Please, I'll do anything. Anything to fix this. Her voice broke, and for a fleeting second I saw a flash of the woman I once loved. But the memory was quickly drowned out by the bitter truth of who she had become. I don't want your apologies, I said coldly, standing up from the table. And you can't fix this. You and Jeremy, I glanced at him, his face still pale and slack. You've already destroyed everything. I pulled out my phone, unlocking the screen with a swipe of my thumb. I've already sent everything to your bosses. By tomorrow, your careers will be over. All of it, your affairs, the embezzlement, every last sordid detail. And your families? I let the words sink in. They'll know too. You'll be lucky if you can even look your kids in the eyes after this. Jeremy slumped in his chair, his hands now covering his face, shaking. Hannah's breaths came out in quick, shallow gasps, her hand reaching out toward me, but I took a step back, out of her reach. Please, she whimpered. Don't do this. We'll lose everything. You should have thought about that before you destroyed our family, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. David, Jeremy's voice cracked. He finally spoke up, desperation lacing his tone. Think about Lily. Please, don't do this to her. Lily. Her name was like a trigger, pulling me back from the brink of the icy rage that had consumed me for so long. I'd done all of this for her. She was the one thing in my life that still made sense, still gave me a purpose. I pictured her bright smile, the way she clung to my leg when I picked her up from school, the sound of her laughter filling our house. This wasn't just about revenge. It had never been just about me. It was about protecting her. They had taken so much from me, from her, and they had to pay for it. But there was no satisfaction in watching them beg, no relief, only the gnawing realization that none of this could put things back the way they were. I am thinking about Lily, I finally said, my voice hollow, and that's why I'm doing this. I turned my back on them, walking toward the door. Behind me, I heard Hannah's sobs turn into hysterical wails, her words tumbling out in a garbled mess of apologies and pleas. Jeremy stayed silent, defeated, broken. It didn't matter anymore. I'd won, but the victory was cold, bitter. I pushed the door open, stepping out into the cool night air, leaving them behind to deal with the wreckage of their lives. My heart pounded in my chest, but it wasn't the thrill of victory that fueled it. It was the realization of what came next. As I walked down the empty street, away from the hotel, the weight of everything began to press down on me. I had destroyed them, just as I'd planned. Their jobs, their reputations, their families, it would all be gone by morning. And yet I felt no sense of justice. Only the void, yawning wider, threatening to swallow me whole. The fallout was swift. Jeremy lost his job within 48 hours. His employer had no tolerance for personal misconduct, especially not when it involved illicit affairs with colleagues. His wife, true to her word, left him, took the kids. The last I heard, he was living alone, drowning in legal fees and divorce proceedings. Hannah didn't fare any better. The email I'd sent to her boss sparked an internal investigation that quickly spiraled out of control. The whispers of her affair with Jeremy spread through the office like wildfire. She was fired within a week, her professional reputation destroyed. Everywhere she went, people whispered, pointed, judged. She had become a pariah in our town. I saw it all unfold from a distance, detached, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel instead of the people I had once considered family. I stayed focused on Lily, trying to give her as much normalcy as I could while her world fell apart around her. But she wasn't stupid. She could sense the tension, feel the absence of her mother in the house. "Where's Mommy?" she asked me one evening as I tucked her into bed. I paused, the words catching in my throat. What could I tell her? How could I explain to a 5-year-old that her mother had shattered our family, that everything we once had was gone? "She's not going to be home for a while," I finally said, my voice heavy. "Did she do something bad?" The innocence in her question cut deeper than anything I had felt up to that point. I stroked her hair, my hand trembling slightly. "She made some mistakes, sweetheart." Lily nodded, her eyes wide with understanding that went beyond her years. "But she'll come back, right?" I didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense to her. So I kissed her forehead, tucked her in, and turned off the lights, hoping that sleep would take her before the questions began again. As I closed the door to her room, the silence settled back into the house. The silence of a broken home, a fractured family. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on the door frame, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had gotten my revenge. I had made them suffer. But in the process, I had lost something I could never get back. Weeks passed, but the emptiness only grew. The satisfaction I had expected never came. Hannah's calls went unanswered. She left voicemails, texts, emails, each more desperate than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to face her. What was left to say? What could she possibly say to undo the damage she had caused? One night I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window into the darkness. The house was too quiet, too still. The house was, Lily was asleep upstairs, but the absence of Hannah echoed through every corner, every room. I had thought revenge would give me closure, that watching them beg would heal the wounds they'd inflicted, but all it had done was tear me apart even more. The phone buzzed on the table, another message from Hannah, another apology, another plea for forgiveness. I didn't read it. Instead, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and stepped out into the night. The air was cool against my skin, the world around me silent. I walked without direction, my mind a blur of memories, regrets, and anger. When I finally stopped, I found myself at the edge of a park, staring at the swings where Lily liked to play. I sat down on the bench, my head in my hands, and for the first time in weeks, I let the tears fall. I wasn't crying for Hannah, not for Jeremy, not even for the family I had lost. I was crying for myself, for the man I used to be, the man who had believed in trust, in loyalty, in love. The man who had been stripped bare, left hollow and broken. And as I sat there, alone in the darkness, I realized something I had been too blind to see before. Revenge had a price, and I had paid it in full. The fallout was brutal. Swift, yes, but brutal in ways I hadn't entirely anticipated. It didn't take long after the confrontation for the pieces of their lives to start disintegrating. Jeremy lost his job first. The emails I'd sent, carefully composed and sent under the guise of anonymous tips, had ignited a firestorm at his workplace. The office grapevine spread the rumors, the whispers about his affair with a colleague, my wife no less, like a virus. Soon enough, management had no choice but to let him go. The official reason was a breach of conduct. The real reason was that no one wanted to be associated with the scandal. I heard the news from Jeremy's wife. After she'd left him and taken the kids, she still kept me informed, almost like it gave her some twisted comfort to know I was keeping tabs just like she was. We were connected now, inextricably linked by our shared destruction. Hannah's downfall came next. Her company, more conservative in nature, didn't waste time. They opened an investigation as soon as I sent them the evidence of her affair and the misappropriation of funds. It turned out that the hotels and extravagant dinners weren't just hurting our family savings. Hannah had been using the company credit card for a few of their more memorable nights. She was fired for unethical behavior, her reputation in tatters. I remember hearing her voicemail the day it happened, her voice broken, pleading for me to answer, to talk, to help her. I didn't. In the days following her termination, I began seeing her around town. She moved through the grocery store, the post office, even the park with a defeated air, as though the weight of what she'd done was physically dragging her down. People whispered when they saw her. I noticed how she tried to avoid their stares, but it was no use. She was a walking scandal, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. But the thing is, none of this brought the closure I had imagined. None of it filled the emptiness inside me. I had done what I set out to do. I had dismantled their lives, brick by painful brick. They were left in ruins, both professionally and personally. Their families were broken, their children caught in the crossfire of their parents' mistakes. Jeremy was fighting a losing battle in family court, trying to salvage some visitation rights after his wife had moved out and filed for divorce. Hannah was living in a small rental apartment on the edge of town, isolated, jobless, and shamed. And yet, despite all of this, I couldn't shake the hollow feeling that gnawed at me. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. I had achieved everything I'd planned, but there was no satisfaction in it. No relief, no peace, just emptiness. I tried to focus on Lily. After all, I had done this for her, hadn't I? To protect her, to shield her from the wreckage of our broken marriage. But even she could sense that something was wrong. Every night when I tucked her into bed, I saw the questions behind her wide, innocent eyes. Where's Mommy, Daddy? Is she coming home soon? I'd brush the hair from her forehead, kiss her goodnight, and offer the same vague answers. Mommy's not going to be home for a while, sweetheart. She never pressed me too hard, but I knew it hurt her. She missed Hannah. No matter what Hannah had done, she was still Lily's mother. And that's what ate at me the most. For all the ways I had destroyed her life, for all the ways I had broken Jeremy and Hannah's worlds apart, the one person I hadn't accounted for was Lily. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't done anything wrong. And yet, here she was, living in a broken home, without a mother, confused and hurt in ways I couldn't fix with a bedtime story or an extra cookie after dinner. The days blurred together in a haze of routine. I'd wake up, get Lily ready for school, go to work, come home, and try to keep everything as normal as possible. But the silence in the house was deafening. The space where Hannah used to be was a constant reminder of everything I'd lost, everything I had willingly destroyed. I thought about calling her. I don't know why. Maybe out of some morbid curiosity, or maybe just to see if hearing her voice would stir something in me other than the cold bitterness that had settled in my chest. But every time I picked up the phone, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Her messages kept coming. At first they were frantic, pleas for forgiveness, explanations I didn't want to hear. Then they grew quieter, more resigned, until eventually they stopped altogether. I told myself it was what I wanted, that I didn't care. But that wasn't entirely true. One evening, I sat in the living room after putting Lily to bed, staring at the darkness outside the window. The house felt unbearably quiet. The same silence that had once felt like victory now felt like a weight pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do with it. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. For a moment, I thought it might be Hannah again, but when I glanced at the screen, it was a message from my brother, Mark. Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up? I stared at the message for a long time before typing out a response. I'm fine. It was a lie, of course. I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for weeks, maybe longer. But I didn't know how to explain that. I didn't know how to tell him that I had gotten everything I wanted and still felt like I was drowning. Mark didn't respond right away, and that was fine. I didn't expect him to. He had his own life, his own family to worry about. I was the one who had to deal with the consequences of my actions. I stood up, pacing the living room, running my hands through my hair. I thought about the moment I'd forced Jeremy and Hannah to beg, how powerful I'd felt watching them break in front of me. It had been the culmination of everything I'd planned, every piece of their lives crumbling under the weight of their guilt and shame. But now, standing here in the dark, all I felt was the crushing weight of what I'd lost. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, needing to escape the suffocating silence of the house. The air was cool, the night sky clear, and I found myself walking without any real direction. My feet carried me to the park down the street, the same park where I'd sat weeks ago, crying over the man I used to be. I didn't cry this time. There was no use in it. Instead, I sat down on the same bench, staring out at the empty swing swaying gently in the breeze. I thought about everything that had happened, about how I'd gotten here, about the choices I'd made, the people I'd hurt. Had I done the right thing? Was this what justice looked like? I had spent so long convincing myself that this was about protecting Lily, about making sure she never became collateral damage in someone else's selfishness. But now, I wasn't so sure. Because in my quest for revenge, in my need to make them suffer, I had become just as selfish. I had taken away her mother. I had created a world where Lily would never have a complete family again. And for what? For justice? Or for the satisfaction of knowing I had won? I didn't know anymore. The swing creaked softly in the distance, and I closed my eyes, letting the night settle around me. I didn't regret what I'd done, not entirely. Jeremy and Hannah had deserved every ounce of pain I inflicted on them. They had destroyed my life, my family, my trust. They had brought this on themselves. But in the process, I had lost something too. I had lost the man I used to be. The man who believed in love, in trust, in second chances. I had become someone else, someone colder, more detached, someone who had spent so long plotting revenge that he didn't know how to live without it. And now, I was left with the aftermath, the wreckage of what used to be my life. I stayed on the bench for a long time, the night air chilling my skin, but I didn't move. I couldn't, because for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. Revenge had a cost, and I had paid it in full. But the price wasn't just theirs to bear. It was mine too. The night air grew colder as I sat on the bench, lost in the stillness of the park. My thoughts circled around me like shadows, each one darker and heavier than the last. The truth, the full weight of it, had finally settled in, and I couldn't escape it any longer. I had won. That's what I kept telling myself. I had destroyed the people who had torn my life apart. I had made them suffer, forced them to beg for mercy. But as I sat there, staring into the empty playground where Lily used to laugh and run, I couldn't shake the feeling that, in some ways, I had lost just as much as they had, maybe more. I stood up from the bench, my legs stiff from sitting too long, and began walking back home. The streets were quiet, the windows of the houses dark. It was late, but I wasn't in a hurry. The longer I delayed going back to that empty house, the better. When I finally arrived, the house felt colder than it ever had before. The silence inside pressed in on me, heavier than the night itself. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, closing my eyes. I could hear the faint sound of Lily's breathing from her bedroom upstairs. That soft, rhythmic rise and fall of air was the only thing anchoring me to this place. I had done it all for her, hadn't I? That's what I kept telling myself. I had destroyed Hannah and Jeremy because they had hurt our family, because they had hurt Lily. But now, with the dust settling, I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe it had been more about me than it had ever been about her. I walked into the living room, the dim glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The photos on the mantel caught my eye, the ones of Hannah and me, smiling, looking so happy, so secure in what I thought was an unshakable marriage. One photo in particular stood out. It was of the three of us, Hannah, Lily, and me, taken on Lily's third birthday. We were in the backyard, balloons tied to the fence, a small cake on the table. Lily had frosting smeared all over her face, her giggle frozen in time. I took the picture off the mantel and stared at it, my thumb brushing against the glass. What had happened to that family? How had we gone from that moment to this one? The truth was, I had played my part in this collapse too. I had let the cracks in our marriage go unchecked. I had buried myself in work, convinced myself that providing for my family was enough. Maybe, in some way, I had pushed Hannah away, made it easier for her to find comfort in someone else's arms. It didn't justify what she had done, not by a long shot, but it made me realize that the story of our marriage wasn't as simple as a villain and a victim. I placed the picture back on the mantel, my hand lingering on the frame for a moment before stepping away. I needed to let go of the past, but I didn't know how. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but there was something else now, something quieter, sadder, regret. I had destroyed Hannah and Jeremy, but I had also destroyed the family that Lily had known. She would grow up without her mother in the house, and as much as I wanted to believe that was for the best, I wasn't sure anymore. Every time she asked about Hannah, every time she looked up at me with those wide, questioning eyes, I felt a sharp pang of guilt. I had taken her mother away from her, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to make that right. I sat down on the couch, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me. The adrenaline of revenge had long since worn off, and now all that was left was the aftermath. I was alone, truly alone. Even the thought of reaching out to someone, Mark maybe, or a friend, felt impossible. What could I say? How could I explain that, after all of this, after everything I had done, I felt more empty than ever? The phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a moment I ignored it. But then curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at the screen. It was another message from Hannah. Her texts had grown fewer and further between, but every now and then she would reach out, trying to bridge the distance between us. I opened the message, my finger hesitating over the screen. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," it began. "I know I've ruined everything, but I need you to understand. I never meant for it to end like this. I miss Lily. I miss her so much. Please, David, let me see her. I'm begging you." I closed the message, my heart tightening in my chest. Part of me wanted to delete it, to shut her out completely, but another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had once loved, couldn't help but feel something. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, but something close to sadness. She wasn't asking for me anymore. She was asking for Lily. And as much as I wanted to hate her, as much as I wanted to believe she didn't deserve another chance, I couldn't deny that Lily missed her mother. No matter how much I tried to fill the void, there were things I couldn't give her. She needed both of us, didn't she? I stood up from the couch, pacing the room. This was a choice I didn't want to make. If I let Hannah back into Lily's life, even in a small way, it felt like betraying everything I had done. It felt like undoing the justice I had fought so hard for. But if I didn't, if I kept Lily from her, I would be the one responsible for creating that hole in her life. I walked to the stairs and stood at the bottom, listening to the sound of Lily's soft breathing from her room. I thought about her future, about the kind of person I wanted her to grow up to be. I didn't want her to live in a world defined by bitterness and revenge. I didn't want her to carry the same anger I had been carrying for so long. She deserved better than that. Taking a deep breath, I climbed the stairs and opened her door. She was fast asleep, her small body curled up beneath the blankets, her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. I stood in the doorway for a long time watching her, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. I had fought for justice, and in some ways I had found it. But justice wasn't the same as peace. And what Lily needed now wasn't more anger. She needed healing. She needed both of her parents in her life, even if things could never go back to the way they were. I stepped into the room, knelt beside her bed, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her lips parted slightly, a soft sigh escaping her as she shifted in her sleep. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who the apology was for. Lily, myself, or Hannah. Maybe all of us. I kissed her forehead and stood up, my heart heavy, but a little clearer than it had been before. I walked back downstairs and picked up my phone. I stared at Hannah's message for a long moment before finally typing a response. "You can see her. But we'll talk first." I hit send and set the phone down, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread wash over me. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't reconciliation. But it was a step. A small, uncertain step towards something better than the hollow revenge that had consumed me for so long. I walked over to the window and looked out into the night, the same darkness I had stared into so many times before. But this time, it didn't feel as suffocating. The weight of everything I had done, everything I had lost, was still there, but it didn't crush me the way it had before. I would live with the consequences of my actions for the rest of my life. That was the price of justice. But maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild something in the ruins. Lily deserved that. And maybe, deep down, so did I. As the night stretched on, I stood at the window, watching the quiet world outside, accepting the loneliness that came with the choices I had made. But in that loneliness, there was a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It had to be.